Morning, I'm Eric Jacobson with Manufacturer Insights, and I'm here this morning with Dina Corrado. Good morning, Dina.
Good morning, Eric.
Dina is with ServPro, Team Lutz, and she's going to talk about things that business owners and manufacturers need to understand before a disaster happens, during, what do you do to stop the bleeding, and then reconstruction. And there are some important things that Dina will talk about that a lot of business owners don't think of. I read a couple of statistics. I just want to throw them in here. Just over half, 54% of businesses have a documented company-wide disaster recovery plan in place for their organization. Just 54%. The other statistic I read from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and I've seen different percentages as high as 50%, but this says 40% of small and mid-sized businesses never reopen after a natural disaster, and an additional 25% reopen but fail within a year. This is why this topic is so important. So when we talk about planning, pre-planning, anything you can do to help make a disaster less painful, it's so important.
Absolutely, because there's things that you'll never think about. It just takes time, and it's not something anybody wants to talk about. But if you talk about it ahead of time, it just makes you more prepared. And you're right. I think our statistic that I use is 50% of the businesses don't reopen after a disaster if they don't have a plan. Now, if they have a plan, then obviously they've already talked about business interruption insurance and things like that. The ones that do fail, it's because they haven't thought of something along the way.
We're going to break it down today into three major topic areas. The first is emergency readiness and preparedness. Number two is going to be disaster mitigation. And number three would be disaster reconstruction. So, Dina, when we start talking about things that business owners need to know before a disaster strikes, this is a huge topic. But why don't you start us off with what are some of the things that business owners should be thinking about and planning for before a disaster, which no one knows when a disaster is going to happen. If they did, that would be awesome, wouldn't it?
I wish I could predict it or prevent it.
Yeah.
So what we try and do beforehand is I typically like to meet with the commercial customer, the manufacturer, walk the whole property so I understand what's encompassing of it, or for anybody, no matter who you're using or who you choose. Your insurance company has a huge part in that as well. So you want to make sure that you have a really good agent and that they understand what you do, how you do it, and what are the most important parts about your manufacturing. So when we do that and you walk the property, you have a better understanding of what the most integral parts of the business are. And then when you do that, you can identify things that you might not think of as you're going through. We're going to show you today a diagram of some people or some thoughts that you should think about prior to a disaster so that you're prepared if and when it does happen. It's not usually if, it's more when.
So I think your business is a little bit unique. So in this preparedness process, as you said, you'll come out, you'll meet with the business owners, do your walkthrough. I know that there's other things that you do. Is that something is there a fee for that?
There is not. There's a couple of reasons we do that. One, I can be prepared, God forbid you should have an incident. Number two would be that we can set up an app for you that is also free of charge, but you get an understanding of your building and everything about your building. It's not just coming in. What's the evacuation plan? Do you have a blueprint to your building? Where are your shut-off valves located? It's really more for the user so that they understand where everything is in their building and it's not in some hidden area. It also can have every one of your vendors in it. So who's your roofer? Because you have a problem. Who do you deal with your electric? Who's the contact person? What's your account number? All those things, your insurance company, their office number, their cell number, should all be readily available to you, because in the time of a crisis, you're not going to go to your office and pick up a book that has your insurance information in it, or if it's a fire, you're not going to go get your PICO account number. So this should all be at your hand, because we all know there's not one thing we forget in the morning. It's never our phone.
As I understand it, part of this is developing a partnership with you so that not only does the business owner have their plan, maybe they have the app and it's on their cell phone, but then you also have done a walkthrough and you understand that when a disaster happens, here's where the shutoff valves are. If someone's not coming in blind when mitigation's taking place, it's going to move you through your mitigation process for a manufacturer faster than if you had to go gather information or walked into a building without knowing anything about it. Is that correct?
Correct. And then I would also add that it's helpful in large situations that we already have a plan in place. One, I already know who I need to speak to, who's authorized on the account, who needs to call us in. And that stuff is done instead of wasting time and hours getting that information done. We've already assessed it prior. And so we can get in there and clean it up faster, get you back up and running faster.
So let me ask this question. We talked about insurance a little bit. Do you, when you're in the preparedness phase, do you talk at all about, maybe not getting into details of insurance coverage, but do you talk at all about things that, from an insurance perspective, that owners should be talking to their insurance agents about as far as coverage or anything like that?
If it's one of my clients and I know that there's a specific coverage that I'm aware of, I will bring it to their attention, just because I'm here to help you long before you ever have an incident. So if I can impart any little bit of knowledge, I'm happy to share, or happy to connect you with somebody that has more knowledge than myself.
So Dina, I'm going to pull up this diagram that you were talking about earlier, the one that I guess is part of your walkthrough. And if you could maybe describe what you do and why it's important, maybe a little bit more detail.
So I think the diagram helps owners, CFOs, or operations managers understand or think about things that they might not think of in the time of a disaster. What do I mean by that? It'll talk about who's your HR person, have their name and number. Who's going to be in charge of is the HR person going to be the contact for your employees? Who's going to be in charge of the media? Because usually when these events happen, media shows up. It should not be the same person. The president should not be the person talking to the media. The media person shouldn't be the one talking to the employees. Identify that prior to any event so that you can have a smoother, more well thought out plan.
And you also talk about backups. So let's say there's someone assigned. What if they're not available for some reason?
Absolutely. So there's just a lot of questions, and that diagram helps you to think outside of the box and what you might need. It doesn't, of course, encompass everything, but it does give you ideas. And in that emergency plan that I spoke about before, we can identify those people and their phone numbers, their cell numbers, their office numbers, so that it's at your fingertips and you can dial the phone right away.
So Dina, when you're doing your walkthroughs, do you ever identify things that you may point out to the business owner? And if so, why is that important?
Absolutely, because what I'll do is I'll walk through, try and understand the process that's happening, because usually I'm with someone who understands the operation of the business. And then we'll identify, or I might see something that they see every day and they don't realize that it's a potential problem, or a risk management issue. It just is helpful to have a different set of eyes that are new and fresh. And I'm going to ask questions. I ask a million questions through the walkthrough, but I'm only asking so that I understand better, so that I can serve you better.
And why is it important that, let's say you see something, why is that important to point out to the business owner and have them correct it?
Because your insurance company is not going to handle something that you should have maintained or taken care of on a daily or regular maintenance. They're just not going to cover it. If you leave something go and hope that your roof blows off, they're not going to give you a new roof because you decided to leave the hole in there. You have to maintain it and keep it up and running. And then if it's quick and sudden is usually the words they'll use, then they'll cover it.
If you were doing your walkthrough and I don't know, you see a roof leaking and there's buckets around the workshop floor, then later something happens and they have a major roof issue. Is that an example of something where maybe the insurance company wouldn't pay if they were aware that was the situation?
Absolutely. And the other thing is, even when you're looking at machinery and there's maybe an oil spill and someone slips and falls, and there's just little things that you identify going through. An exit sign that's not lit up, you can get dinged for your insurance. I know it seems trivial, but it's worth it in the long run just to have a fresh set of eyes on it. Okay, a good example of being prepared for a disaster, I have sent Eric a picture, he'll put it in, is about during the Hurricane Sandy, Goldman Sachs was the only one who was prepared with a disaster plan, had generators, was ready to do business. And in this photo, it will show you how no one else was.
That's the only building that's lit up.
Only one.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone through this preparation process where you've set up roles and responsibilities. The owners set up roles and responsibilities within the organization. You've had a walkthrough. You've identified potential things that you may see that they may want to take care of. Now, all of a sudden, a disaster strikes when you least expect it. So the next phase is mitigation. So what are some things that owners need to be thinking about in this mitigation stage?
I would say everybody always wants to know, who do I call first? Do I call myself? Do I call my insurance agent? So you want to stop the bleeding immediately. So best thing to do is call us first or call a restoration company first, because they're going to stop the bleeding. They're going to start to mitigate the situation and get you cleaned up faster. While simultaneously you can be in contact with your insurance agent. But that's a conversation you want to have with your insurance agent. I don't know what your deductibles are. Those are different conversations, whether it's going to be self-pay or you're going to fill out a claim. But the worst thing or the best thing you could do is get in touch right away. Start getting it cleaned up, because it will take some time to load up the trucks, because I'm going to be asking all kinds of questions about square footage. What room was it in? Especially if I have a blueprint of your property. How far did it affect it? What the materials are on the wall if it's not noted in the emergency plan already. What's the floor made of? So that I bring the proper equipment and we get started fast, and then we're not having to run back and forth and wasting time in travel time.
So if people are needed, maybe they are subcontractors, could be a plumber, electrician, someone else. Do you have those contacts?
We do have contacts in every field, but usually, depending on the size of the business, they already have existing relationships, and that is also listed in their emergency plan so that they don't have to fumble to find those numbers or emails or anything about that. But we're happy to help them find other suppliers if they have something that they don't have it is not covered.
One thing I heard you speak about before is, so let's say that you have a disaster, you're doing cleanup work, and one of the things you talked about was documenting everything that's thrown out. Could you talk about that a little bit and why that's important?
It's so important. Often, if you can videotape each one of your areas, that's great. Anything you do prior to, whether it's this emergency plan, videotaping, photographs, maintenance logs, any of that you can possibly show your insurance company, that you become a better risk. So they're going to be, they know you're doing the right things. They know you're taking care of your building. You're doing everything you can to take care of your machines inside and out. So it's just a better risk. You can share your emergency plan with them. Again, it's documented. But when you start to come into a loss, whether it be fire, water, sewage, biohazard, I often tell people, just give yourself a second and take a videotape. We'll document photos and things like that, but videotape what's around you, because your immediate reaction is to clean it up or start throwing things away. But you're not understanding the value of the stuff you're throwing away. So you want to have that documented so that you're not missing a piece of the pie.
You want to get reimbursed, as much as you can. Things you may not think have value, if you have to replace them, it has value to you. So.
Correct. I've gone into situations right after a fire and they're just throwing out all kinds of paper product. I'm talking by cases. And that adds up pretty quickly when you start thinking about it if you're not documenting.
What things have you found with people who try to do their own mitigation?
It's funny you should say that. I just had a call on it last night. We all have maintenance teams and whatever, and we can handle some mitigation. But when you start to do it and you're not documenting it properly and you're not drying it properly, it leads to other things. It might lead to mold. It might lead to other hazards that you're not even thinking about. You're thinking, I'm doing the best I can. I'm mopping it up. I got this. It's good. It's always good to have us come back or come out and look at it. And because we document things according to what the insurance company wants it documented, which we help you through that insurance process as well. And not just me, I'm talking anybody, but would help you with that and help you to make sure you're getting the money that you need to make yourself whole.
We're talking about mold. Is it common that someone tries to fix something themselves, they fix one problem, then they get reimbursed for that, and then a month later something else has popped up? What are the implications of that? What have you seen in those areas?
It's another one of those conversations we have with people, that if you're going to go and you're having a water event, I'll just say it's the easiest, because whether it's fire, water is still the damaging factor. So if you're having a water event and that water event is not fixed, the plumber's not out, whatever, your insurance company is going to pay to have it fixed and remediated and mitigated once. If you don't do it the right way the first time, they're not going to come back out and give you another check. So I think people need to realize that. We also do some lunch and learns with some larger commercial properties so that they understand what they can do before we even get there. So in addition to what we offer, we also can help you with some other things that you might not be familiar with, like contingency planning. And what does that look like in the event of a disaster? That might be real estate, moving, getting you set up in another warehouse. What does that look like? I have plenty of context that I'd be happy to share.
Those would be other organizations that can help businesses do that contingency planning?
Correct, and make that transition, or at least the preparedness of the transition. And then when that, God forbid, that incident happens, you are prepared, you know who to call.
Yeah, I've heard of many cases. People just don't think of, everyone assumes, oh, I'm going to have a little roof leak and I'll be able to continue having my machines run. And that's not always the case. You may need to pick up and relocate machinery, employees. What's the impact on employees? So a lot to think about, and that's where those organizations may be able to help.
And no one wants to talk about disasters or emergencies, but I think you're just better to have the conversation prior to, and then you won't feel so overwhelmed. And it's tragic, no matter what happens. But it is an overwhelming feeling, especially if you don't have any knowledge of what that looks like, how to walk through a claim, how to navigate all the moving parts in one time. One of the things people often forget about is your emergency responders. So if you can facilitate a relationship with them, prior is it's worth its weight in gold.
How would you go about doing that? I'm not sure what you mean.
So it might be that you decide to buy them lunch, or you visit their firehouse, the emergency, the ambulance, or you support one of their, become a sponsor, help them with one of their events. Believe me, they will not forget you in
Hmm.
yours.
That's a great thought. I hadn't never would have thought of that. Okay, so we've moved through the mitigation phase. We've stopped the bleeding. Now it's time for the reconstruction phase. So Dina, introduce us to the reconstruction phase. What's going on? That what are you doing? What is the business owner doing? What things are they thinking about in this phase?
Depending on the situation, we can reconstruct. We have our own construction department that is separate from our mitigation department, and we can help with all of that. Or we might suggest that certain people that you should use. Let's talk about what is, if you have large machinery, does that machinery, was that affected in the fire or the water issue? Does it need to be cleaned a certain way? We have people lined up that are specialized in just electronics. There might be computers that were affected, or now I'm finding in manufacturing almost everything is computerized in some way, shape, or form. The other part that I would talk to people about, not just with reconstruction, probably should talk about this in the beginning, is what does your cyber insurance look like? What does that cover? Such an important part. Manufacturing now has so many computerized processes that require coverage, and people don't think about. That's a huge piece.
She's going to be doing a webinar coming up on cybersecurity. So we'll be covering that topic in great detail. But you're right, there's things that people don't think about. And it's not even just people stealing data, it's a website going down. We had a manufacturer was 1 week away from attending a trade show, and someone got in and they had hacked the website 3 or 4 months earlier, and the hosting backup wasn't good anymore because most hosting backups are for 30 days, and they didn't discover the problem until the 30 days had passed. So they had no backup. Their website was down. They came to us. We were able to get something put up for them for the trade show, and they actually got some business from that. But we're now in the process of rebuilding them a new site. So it's a very important topic that people don't.
And even when you're not talking about a disaster, that's such an important thing, because it can be hacked into and shut down their whole manufacturing. And because I guess we have to start to think about the awful things, that's just one thing I bring up to people.
So in the reconstruction phase, again, the ultimate goal is to get get the business operational again, but also financially, this is so important, is to make them whole, get as much reimbursement as possible. Dean, as we start to wrap up, first of all, I want to thank you for covering these topics. I think everyone knows of someone who's had a disaster, and I think they always think it won't happen to them. But what I appreciate about you, I've been in situations where I've heard you talk about your business, talk about some case studies. But what's impressed me about you is it's developing a partnership with somebody before the disaster strikes. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit just about the role you play with your clients and that partnership.
Sure. I'm happy to be a resource to all my clients. I just would like to know them and understand their priorities prior to the worst day of their life. If I can help them navigate any of that, whether it's selecting a vendor or making a connection for them in any way, shape, or form, I'm happy to help no matter what.
Dina, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you
And
for having me.
absolutely. And for everybody watching, again, we will be having a cybersecurity disaster recovery discussion coming up with an IT company. And that's going to be together with a risk management insurance broker, Ryan Stillwell, who you may have seen on some of our other webinars. So looking forward to that. And great. Well, thank you, Dina. You have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.